I can. Where is he? Getting the band back together. I'm sure he dropped in there. Where'd he go? He's on mute. Anyway. All right. So I might just do a quick introduction, and then I'll get on to you because it's the BYOB presentation. We like to start on time, finish on time. So we respect your time, as I always say. So today we have a very interesting individual, Angus, who we've invited to be part of this webinar. And the reason why I invited Angus to join is he's got an amazing business, Creative Frontier, which he'll tell you all about, and he's got a lot of skills and expertise in his particular area. But he also did the BYOB program in the second iteration that we did, and is in our BYOB Grow Club. So he has a lot of experiential knowledge of how we work and how we operate. And I've invited Angus to do more work with us in the future at Social Star and BYOB. So, you know, I found that his ways of working and talent for getting more out of content for our clients has been, you know, really, really well received. He's got his own agency and he's going to be working with us in the future as well. So we wanted to get him on the webinar to just showcase what he can do for people to our BYOB audience. And then, you know, we're going to, at the end, talk to you about a workshop that he wants to run. Sorry, we want him to run, I should say, that I've asked him to run for our clients, which will be a lot more in depth than today's sort of presentation. That's the format we want to run with these. You know, we give a presentation overview, and then if people are interested, they go into the workshop, which is longer, more detailed, more specifically related to them. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Angus to take us away.
Thanks, Andrew. Well, what a glowing introduction. I don't have to talk about myself at all, so thank you so much for that. But I still will, because it ties into what we're talking about for the workshop, which is, you know, the hero brand and the brand that we're building. It's nice to see a lot of people that I have personally also met through the BYOB events, the program, and chatted to as well. So it's good to see you guys here as well. But let's move along. So yeah, as Andrew highlighted, this is a collaboration between Creative Frontier and Build Your Own Business. I thought this was a pretty fun. I feel like this is kind of the energy that we bring when Andrew and I get together in a space. Fun, but there's a professional poking there still. Now, the theme of this workshop is about how to become your industry's hero with stories that sell your value. You know, for me, a year ago, I wasn't really sure how to connect my creative education. I went to University of Melbourne, did a creative writing major. I've been writing since grade 2, so you know, it's 15 years of doing creative writing, studying creative writing, and studying other people's writing. And I was like, how do I connect this to something for practical value for professionals like yourselves? So today I'm here because I stopped telling my story the wrong way, which wasn't landing, wasn't connecting, and I just started telling it the right way. And we're going to be going through what that process looks like for you. So who am I? Not to recap everything that Andrew just talked about. I'm going to talk about it in the sense of the hero brand. Who am I in a hero sense? So I don't mean, you know, are you wearing a cape? Are you fighting crime? You know, is your city that you live in called Gotham? You know, I'm talking about what is your point of view that you have that your leads think is worth listening to over the other voices in your industry. You are the brand that's wrapped around your industry that they find most preferable. If you think about an AI rapper, you know, ChatGPT has people are making rappers all the time with a W, not like a music rapper. And so viewing yourself as a rapper around your industry and around your service that 10 other people are also offering, why is that more attractive? And it comes back to your hero brand. So you're also seen as for purpose, you know, because your business is built on a really solid brand. There's a purpose there that is also attractive, that's trying to use an individual. And we'll unpack that more. And then ultimately, if you're for purpose, then there's also a cause that you're fighting for. You've got like maybe a 1-sentence slogan that maybe it's not part of your official branding right now, but you definitely say it in your pitches and you say it when you're talking to people. And when you're looking in the mirror in the morning thinking, I can do another day of running my business, you know, and you're motivating yourself, you've got this rhetoric that you take yourself through. So to show you how this works, let's start with who I am and the story that I'm standing on today. So I'm going to use a couple of words here that'll make some more sense later. Right now, there just might be some buzzwords. But pulling on the beats from the hero's journey in literature, a lot of great books that we know have been written on the hero's journey, let me put mine into that context. So number one, at the bottom line, I've always wanted to tell stories. That's true. You know, from as young as grade 2, I've been writing stories. I've been watching stories, love the cinema, reading them, playing them, you know, video games, performing in them. I've been on the stage as well. I feel like I give that vibe. And then, you know, the world that I inhabit has not always made it easy to have the freedom to tell stories. You know, I've been a furniture removalist for a year. I've worked on wet farms during lambing season. That's hard work. I've done all sorts of different stuff. I'm 22, but I've worked across 9 different industries, and probably only about 2 of them gave me the chance to tell stories. You know, so I've lived in a world that has felt incomplete for me because it wasn't able to fulfill that purpose for myself. But I'm committed. You know, I did my first business in creative events. There was publishing involved. We're actually doing our 2nd book launch this Saturday, which is exciting, wrapping that up, that chapter. Ran writing workshops for other students, done speaking gigs on creativity and things like that, and tried a lot of different jobs in that space, right? But I was committed, but I was also confronted by the reality, this isn't making me enough money to live. I'm getting the chance to tell stories, but I'm not kind of like changing my life in any meaningful way. It's still just kind of a slightly more profitable hobby. So I was confronted. None of it was working enough to make a life-changing difference. I could pack up my things. I could maybe go back to uni, do a master's in creative editing and writing, which I did get accepted into. You know, I could get a corporate job, go back to being a furniture removalist. There's always a million different ways that you can successfully retreat in life away from pursuing what you want to do professionally as your dream. But I had to find motivation to keep moving forward. And so when you kind of push through that confrontation phase of your life, which we come back to periodically at different ages, you kind of enter this, you know, not to use like a gooey word, but like kind of like a reborn phase. You are in a sense a different person when you push through that. You've been transformed by your experiences. So you go through this cycle of incompleteness, commitment, and confrontation, coming out a different person, new learnings. You know, for me, that started, the first major one of my life was year 12. I got 30 grand worth of scholarships to go to university, coming from my disadvantaged background, but a history of promising young individual. And then the second time, I'm not just saying this because I'm doing BYOB, but the second time would be when I started BYOB, and then through that almost a year-long process, everything else that I was doing alongside BYOB got me about 30K in equivalent exchange of professional development opportunities to become the professional that I am today, being capable enough to run my own agency now and have this opportunity. So, and those 2 major milestones are about 4 years apart. You know, so you guys with more life experience than me can look at your story and start to see the cycles, you know, and the repeats of this life pattern that you have gone through. So that's just framing that. Very quickly, I do want to do an acknowledgement. I'm doing this workshop from the lands of the Wurundjeri here in Melbourne CBD. And I give my respects to elders past and present. And talking about story, right? These people have the oldest story here on this continent as well. So I just give my respect to that. Now, key outcomes for today. By the end of this session, I would like you to understand, well, even now, before we get to the end, this isn't a copywriting lecture. I'm not about to hit you with a bunch of where you should put your apostrophe and your comma and so on, because you would leave early. This is a mental model that I'm educating you on, with which you can use in LinkedIn, in sales calls, in pitches, in bios, in the way that you prompt your generative AI for content. So it's useful for all of that. Storytelling is also not new, but it is one of those best kept secret skills across all of humanity that rarely gets shared, I think, in the way that I'll be unpacking it. That's so accessible for people who maybe don't view themselves as natural storytellers, or aren't necessarily accepted by that traditional storyteller community of writers and artists and so on. So I'm really trying to get at today to answer the question for you of why do stories sell so well, and how can we do that, tap into that power? So after today, you know, I want you to feel like you're able to, one, use your personality as a revenue moat as we move away from a feature obsessed world to a persona, to a personal brand led world, to map your story to a simple hero arc for more fluid and smooth content generation, spotting when you're selling features in your company or your business instead of something of more abstract value, which doesn't have a price cap to it. And then 4, using the 4-step framework that I'll talk about to build hero brand content. So the problem, the industry has gone, or has been for a while, feature obsessed. When everyone zigs, zag, that was the advice that got popularized by BBH, if you know that famous advertising agency. You know, basically saying everybody's doing this, this, and this, and this, and this. You've got to be with the times as well, but find the way to zag, taking that approach and do something that is just wildly different. Nobody expected it. I think a historical example is like the Gutenberg printing press. It's the reason that we all have, you know, books now instead of having to sit down and write a manuscript. When that first got invented, the guy, one of the first things he published was a Bible and tried to sell that en masse. The issue is that most people only buy a Bible once, so didn't make as much money as he could have, right? And then he got bought out and they started using it more to print stories and more repetitive things that you would buy for your children, for your friends and stuff like that. Got a bit obsessed on attaching it to something that was actually just the wrong way to pitch a new piece of technology. For whatever your business is, your brand, when you're pitching, I ask you whether or not you're kind of coming out leads with a whole bunch of features. You know, my service or product does this, 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 and this, and this. And then they go, okay, that's really cool. There's 10 other services that have similar features. Maybe there's some slight differences, but ultimately, like, why should I buy from you? And then because of our professional culture and the way we have consumed even modern advertising has a hand in this, the way that it cuts to a whole bunch of fast facts, usually in fast advertising, you know, the price, it gives you when to use it, it gives you the features. If it's a vacuum, it'll be like, it has a replaceable nozzle, but the additional nozzles don't come with the vacuum that you're buying, right? It focuses on all these different features. You'll be inclined to do the same, to tell them, well, I'm cheaper, or maybe I'm a more premium rate because of this feature. I'm faster because of this technology. You featureize yourself. And when you do that, you've turned yourself into a commodity. And when you're selling something that is a commodity, there is just a cap to how well you can price something like that. Because the mentality in a consumer, when it comes to buying a commodity, its value is pretty strongly tied to something concrete. That is its physical usefulness, because you've attached it to a list of features. So how do we move away from that so that we ourselves aren't limiting our price cap when we're charging, you know, so that we're not tied to a bunch of features that everybody else can do and easily replicate now? How do we move to a story pitch where we can attach it to more abstract value in the same way that Apple has abstract value just in its name, which is why it can charge ridiculous prices on those phones, you know? It's because of that abstract value of the story of Apple. Steve Jobs is basically a professional god at this point, right? You know, the books that have been written, how often he gets quoted. Goodness, this year alone, how many times have I heard Steve Jobs? I was at a networking event and a guy was talking to these people who I never met before, and this guy, to get into the circle, looks at me wearing a blue turtleneck and goes, "Hey, Steve Jobs, how's it going?" So, you know, like, he's just this being used at all times. That's a powerful force that Apple has been riding the success of off that personality for a very, very long time. So for us, it's moving, or if you're already there, cementing your use of abstract value for uncapped scalable growth. So next slide, the landscape then, how's it shifted? If we were feature obsessed, we're now got a lot more noise. You know, AI has equalized surface level skill in many, many areas, and sameness is rampant. And I really don't need to spend very much time on this because we just see it. I've even seen AI generated imagery making its way into physical marketing, you know, out of home stuff on billboards, like the Royal Melbourne Show did it. That was pretty gross. Like, I've been on farms, they had farm animals on that poster. I could tell that those were not real animals. And it's kind of like, I also know how much it would have not costed them to just get some real animals. But instead they did that. So everybody can do it really easily. What's the differentiator now? If everyone can do it at speed, and I recently wrote an article on this through a company that published it, speed is not a competitive advantage. It's now just the baseline, right? Because of technology that we all have access to. So what's the differentiator? And that is your story, that is your moat, that is your, like I referenced before, what is your brand that is wrapping around the same offering that you have to the person, you know, next door, proverbially. So just to do a quick historical lesson that I think we'll all appreciate. Branding is not new. It's not new as a concept, any stretch of the imagination. It wasn't invented by LinkedIn, you know, but we spend a lot of time talking about it on LinkedIn, and there's a lot of, you know, thought leaders and blah, blah, blah. Neither did it sort of come into existence when social media came into existence either, right? It's not new. In fact, it's very, very ancient. I say the Renaissance, but I just think that's because that's probably the maximum distance in history I can go back that would be appropriate for us all to have a touch point to. I could go back to ancient Egypt, but then I'm just like, that's just me, what I studied at university, way too far. So we'll keep it in Italy. So this guy that you're looking at here is Federico de Montefeltro. He was a mercenary in Italy during the 14th century, fought in a lot of wars, got paid a lot of money. He was very successful. You can see his nose, this is a portrait he got. His nose is like that because it actually got injured. And he decided as a personal brand thing, not to get it fixed, but to do that because now he would look different in every portrait as opposed to other people who had like a normal nose, right? So this guy, super successful mercenary, he then manages to persuade the Pope at the time, who he'd helped out a few times, to make him Duke of this small little kingdom on Italy. So he does that, shifting now from a mercenary general, who, by the way, Italians hated because they were turncoats. If they weren't getting paid money, they do their own thing, right? Not a great bunch. And now he's sort of got this noble status of a duke. But the issue with this guy is that he had all of the brand disadvantages you could think of. You know, he had that damaged nose, nobility, incredibly vain back then. He was an illegitimate son of a noble. He was injured, he was blind, and he had that bad rep of being a mercenary in Italy. So he built a carefully engineered identity, portraits of himself, but also the portraits of past historical figures that he had in his kind of like home office, to kind of showcase, I pay attention to these people, I read Socrates, etc., right? Attached himself to the status of the past. He also had stories written about him. He was good pals with a very influential bookseller at the time. He just wrote excellent fluff biographies about this guy, which were highly apocryphal and not true. You know, when you research it, it was just a fad. You know, all myths are based on truth, but this was mostly just not true. And he did a bunch of other stuff. And so we know about him, especially when you study him in the art world, because his library ended up being the second best library, rivaled only by the Vatican. So great collector of books and knowledge, and used that to his advantage too. But he had to do all that to compensate for the fact he didn't really, you know, traditionally belong in that space. So I think for all of us in our industries, we're professionals in our different spaces. I'm in marketing and advertising and personal branding. Why am I here? What's my justification for being here? You could say, whilst I'm not a mercenary general like the Duke here, I'm 22, leading my own agency. I've got some other things to accommodate for, like, you know, a perceived lack of experience and life, you know, enough time in the industry to be viewed as an effective creative director, for example. I have things that I have to do to sort of shoot above and display how I can punch above my weight. But that's also just so I can actually just be a differentiator. How do I transform the fact that I'm, let's say, 22 into a positive? the Duke here is a great example of turning those perceived negatives into positives, even down to his nose. You know, you see that nose and you go, yeah, that's the Duke actually. You know, I can see the Duke. He's got that. In the same way, the statue of David is instantly recognizable. So it's looking at our brand and going, what are the key differentiators, even the ones that are potentially negative? How do we reverse engineer them to become even better standouts? So moving on from that, moving back into the present now, thinking about creativity, we're talking about something that's quite abstract. The personal brand is pretty hard to pin down. It requires a fair degree of creativity. I suppose a question that we would ask ourselves then, are we creative? Am I creative? Are you creative? Well, my philosophy on that, which I take inspiration from the likes of Sir John Haggerty, who has this stance as well, creativity is an expression of self. If you can express a thought, you can create. Coming up with a business name is a creative act. All businesses are based on an idea that you had in your brain first, right? Thinking up an idea is a creative act. So that's not a problem, right? So if you had an issue before, I don't feel like you necessarily did. I'm just saying this to affirm you. Take hold of the fact that you are creative by the nature of the position that you find yourself in. So then expressing that, this is where people can start to kind of do it in ways that are not useful for their brand. How do I express my creativity and my ideas? For example, I had a first business, which was fine. It was not a failure by any stretch of the imagination, but it was trying to sell the right product in the wrong packaging. I was using the wrong form of expression to get to people like yourself. So I changed it up into Creative Frontier, and gee, I got to where I needed to be a lot quicker. Honestly, I was kicking myself. That's part of the journey. That's part of the journey, finding the right ways to express our creativity, our ideas. And then for me, writing is my tool of expression. So, you know, yeah, you will see me writing 4 posts a week on LinkedIn, for example. That works for me. But that's because it's my medium. Blogs, articles, etc. on LinkedIn and on other platforms. So what's your tool? Writing, without sort of, you know, inarguably is a tool that you will use at some point in some capacity as part of your business, whether that's a newsletter outreach or something like that. So let's think about the way, and this is my expertise, what's the best way to be utilizing storytelling in the parts of your business that are writing, and maybe are there other ways that you should be making use of words? And then to look at the hero's journey. This is a bit of a pop culture thing. This isn't a prompt that Mahi and I discussed, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. Put in the chat kind of like a hero's journey that you love. I've got Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, which I grew up consuming. But let's actually dive into the psychology of these 2 stories here, not the plot themselves. But I've got here, this is a 12-step version of the hero's journey. It can be 10 steps, it can be 12. But there's 4 key areas that I really want to unpack that relate highly to entrepreneurs and founders. And when you look at content that's on LinkedIn that's getting the most engagement, converting the most leads into discovery calls and then into clients, what is that content doing on a subconscious level for the people reading it? Number 1, you'll see a lot of posts that sit in that unsettled category. You know, and you can think about the examples I gave from my story and the framing there and slot your own story into this. I was unsettled by the way that the world didn't allow me to kind of express my love for storytelling. So I resisted that status quo and I found a way to start pursuing that. I then became committed and was taking steps like starting a new, a fresh business idea with no formal training or anything like that. I was committed, encouraged by the validation that I was getting, you know, a growing following on the Instagram page, amazing opportunities, businesses reaching out. I was encouraged and committed. And then I was disoriented though, because I ran into problems like, well, okay, I hadn't learned how to do this, this, or this. And so the business was kind of stalling and I had to, you know, go back to school in a sense. And even maybe say, eventually when I was trying to pitch to more professional types, the business that I'd built was giving my pitch an inauthentic feeling because it just didn't make sense for a business like that to be pitching to people like that. So I was confronted by people going, well, that's great and all, but I just don't know if your business can actually do that because it doesn't look like it can. I was confronted by stalling in the process, by getting really close to getting clients, but then just not. And that's the point that I talked about earlier, where you can either choose to walk back into the million different ways that you have available to you to retreat, stable income, or a different job that you know you can do really well, or you can choose to push through into that reborn phase of absorb the learnings, overcome the difficulty, accept the confrontation, and then come out on the other side decisive and complete. And that's the cycle. You'll find I've highlighted reborn, sorry, unsettled, committed, confronted, and reborn, because when you look at LinkedIn content, or even the way professionals are always telling their story, the most successful ones, it bounces between those 4 points constantly. I was unsettled here, I became committed through that unsettlement. I was confronted here, and then my perspective was shifted, my life was changed, blah, blah, blah. That's a repeat cycle, and it never gets boring, because I know for me, I utilize that for my clients. I utilize that strategy. It just gets consistent engagement, because especially in like the Western canon of literature, which we've all grown up being exposed to in one way or another, we've been trained almost since birth, when our parents were reading to us, to understand these themes. So don't let the friction of trying to do something different get in the way. Adopt this strategy, because millions of people are engineered to just get it right in your messaging. So that's a bit of the psychology. Now, my 4-step framework, I've run through this theory. I'm going to get into some case studies soon where I can kind of show the application of all this for clients. But my 4-step framework is something really practical that you can take away, which summarizes all of that into some really simple words. On the top layer, they're called, step 1 is self, step 2 is story, step 3 is strategy, and step 4 is signal. In a content framework, what that looks like is you open your post with a universal problem. You've got a problem, just frame it in a way that goes, most people experience this, blah, blah, blah. I do too. Universal problem. You're talking about yourself, using it as a tool to connect to their selves. They're now thinking about how this problem relates to them. Now, that's also a filter. That's the first filter. So now people who that doesn't relate to, they stop reading and they scroll. Great. We don't want our time wasted with people who are not going to be accurate leads. Then it moves to the story. You've just listed the problem. You unpack how you discovered this was a problem for yourself. I went to this event, this happened, and it gave me this insight about myself, or etc. Or I was people watching at a cafe and I noticed this, etc. That's the story. When you're activating the imagination of your reader, it makes them significantly more engaged and curious. I got to keep reading. Where is this story going? Rather than here's a list of facts. Now, you then move to strategy, which is where you don't recap. And this is one of the biggest tripping points in most posts that you read from people putting stories out there on LinkedIn as a prime example. They then stay in the story and it turns into a recap. Hey, I was invited to this panel. This happened, this happened, this happened. So-and-so said this, I said this. And then we all went to the pub afterwards and had a few drinks, and then I went home. Now that's fun, good for them. But where is the connection to people who weren't at the event? Where is the value in that post for people who weren't in the event? Stuff like that. So it's reframing. I was at this panel, following on from that story, as I was listening to these speakers, I was learning this, share the critical insight. And then I clicked what would be useful for all of you people who are connected with me. I realized by being on this panel, so-and-so. That's the reframe. And then that moves to the signal or the micro lesson from that refreshed perspective. And then you finish with a call to action, like book a discovery call to learn more, for example. So if you take into account the hero's journey, just like those 4 steps specifically that we looked at, the universal problem is looking at that unsettled phase. I'm unsettled by this problem. And then we shift to committed. But I was interested why I was unsettled, so I sought out a way to explore this problem and became committed to finding a solution or just understanding it more. And then here's what I learned. This is where I was confronted by some new learning. That's where you reframe rather than continuing to recap. And then you finish on the signal, which was that micro lesson call to action. My perspective was reborn through this experience. You can have that too by booking a discovery call. So we've got three different things layered over the top of each other that are all reinforcing each other, right? This is a threefold cord, not easily broken. So I'll leave that there. Let's move on to some case studies. This is what I was talking about, Andrew. This is the Adobe experience from my designer coming into play. Very fine motor skills in sketching, which Canva just doesn't have. Perfect. So case studies. They're like lightly anonymized, but for the sake of the work, I've got it here. So case study one, there's an environmental educator that I work really closely with who's super keen on national impact. They've spent much of their time talking the talk. They're a bee scientists, so native bees of Australia is their specialty, went to University of Melbourne, that kind of thing. So they're a climate talker, and they want to go to being a climate, influencer, not in like a TikTok way, by just being in the room where policymakers are, being in those spaces. So their pitch to me was, Angus, I want to transform my brand into one that has some actual social influence weight. How do we do that? And I was like, great, well, we do this. This is my story framework. Everything that I just ran you through, I ran him through. And then we get down to the really practical talk of, here's the practical steps that we're going to do. Yeah, I gave Andrew an example of that flyer, because that's a really great example of storytelling and delivering facts at the same time. He had this documentary that he was doing, and now we're on the marketing train for that. But at the premiere, I was like, we should do a brochure. And I don't mean like just a brochure of, here's what the 7 seasons is about, here's the people in it. We need to craft this thing like a handwritten letter from you, showcasing your passion that you showcase me every week when we have our meetings and we're talking about your brand growth, and have very clear call to actions. So we applied the framework that I just went through the structure of the brochure. And that brochure now has gone back to people's workplaces and been handed to CEOs by workers who attended his documentary. It's been taken to national teaching conferences where people brought extra copies because they had already made the decision in their mind shortly after that documentary, I need to give this to so-and-so at this event. Right? And that's the power that an effective story should be doing, especially when you transmitted it physically effectively. Because one of my big principles that I share with all my clients is, what are the different stories, what are the different channels that your story can be moving through, and why are they relevant, and what do we need to do to get the story moving there without you having to physically be in the space? Because we've been talking about personal brand, and now's a great time to highlight the fact that that's not you as a person. Your personal brand is an authentic persona artificially created, which can feel like a bit of a contradiction, but I think you can understand how that makes sense. It is you're taking a part of you that is authentic and amplifying it, because that's the part that's most relevant for your leads that they need to be seeing and understanding and connecting to, and then fleshing that out a bit more as a person. So yeah, this person is doing lots of really cool things and meeting lots of great politicians and stuff like that, but it's all kind of hush-hush at this stage. But very excitingly, they have been nominated for the Earthshot Prize, which is $1 million if you win. So we're kind of working on that right now. So, it's amazing what your story can do when you are leveraging it in front of the right people. Because he had to get nominated for that by somebody who was a designated nominator for that prize. So there's like all these things that are happening in the background when your story is out there being shared through effective marketing that you just don't know until suddenly this opportunity pops up. That's a magnetic personal brand. And then moving away from that one, because that's a really great example of the hero brand, some different, more small scale stuff. We've got Velvet, who's an artistic tastemaker kind of vibe, which basically means they've got this tech platform where they want to centralize the relationship between artists, venues, and promoters to make it easier for self-managed artists to make money and make a change to their life. So that's very, content retainer kind of stuff. So like organic growth, because we've been leveraging their story correctly and connecting to the right channels, tagging the right people, etc. Organic growth, when you go their follower count as opposed to their impressions and reach, is 181 times what their follower count is, which is like huge amplification. So because of the way we've followed the framework, we've basically just put a giant megaphone to their story, which is just reaching out and out now. So now, we've got their story is getting great top of funnel. And right now we're just in that phase of developing a capture net to get them further down into converting to, say, followers, for example. Community building, C2C, I've just abbreviated content that converts, or content to conversion, which is happening as well, which flows into their subscriber growth, which is their model, a 30% increase since we started working together 7 weeks ago. So, you know, things are happening, and that's story driven. That is 100% story driven. And then on a much smaller scale, I also do 4 weeks of one-on-one creative consultation following a workshop, which we'll be talking about shortly. And that's with a founder of this group that supports, not exclusively, but primarily migrant founders and entrepreneurs who have it a bit harder in terms of access to like legal assistance and software systems and things like that. And so that was very much focused on improving content strategy and brand tone and voice, because he started a really effective movement years ago, still leading it, but he kind of, I could see he kind of disconnected from the movement a bit. It was losing momentum. And I was like, let me help you reconnect and reignite the fact that you're a leader of this movement that you started. Let's get that brand happening again. And right now we're now talking about scaling up that collaboration to things like a newsletter, how to re-engage that audience and monetize community better, all through building a great hero brand. So some of that is challenges, of course. There's lots to learn in agency land, but these are the wins. All right. So getting to the end now for questions. Story strength. I've talked a lot about storytelling, the use of the brand, the framework that I have that works really well. Is it actually a revenue opportunity? Absolutely it is. I just talked about how, you know, subscriber growth is happening by a significant margin for one client, how people are re-engaging with a company because the leader is active again for another. And then in another opportunity, that first environmental educator is getting more and more valuable prizes, awards, grants to continue doing the work that they're doing, as well as getting invited into rooms that before we started chatting, he was dreaming about being invited to, but wasn't being invited to yet. And all it took was, well, not all it took, it's significant mental work, but it took some really careful curated story curation and brand, you know, readjustment. So all of them have gotten increased inbounds, referrals. You know, I'm watching their email boxes flooding in with people requesting them to come and do a paid workshop, or how much of this service that you offer, or blah, blah, blah. In one case of that first client, he's got that documentary. There's been no mention of how much it costs, right? Because he hasn't come up with that price for it yet. But people have been asking unprompted, hey, we'd love to feature it. How much do we have to pay you? So we've been able to position a brand that is for profit, for purpose, and then a product that doesn't even have a price tag on it. People are like, well, how much should I be paying? And that's a really great signal from his target market. They're already ready to pay, which is another great success of a brand. Speaking gigs, absolutely, that's happening for at least a couple of those clients. Velvet is much more ground heavy. There's a lot of like prep work to do before they start flooding in. And then closing deals, whether that's discussions with developers or ministers for environment or whatever, and then pricing, which like the example I gave. But when your story is weak, there's nothing happening. You can continue to try and sell on a features obsessed lens, or you can continue to even try and do like at least one post a week, which is a great starting point, but it is only the starting point, and you really must, maybe not you, maybe you need a teammate, maybe you need an agency, but finding the correct ways for your specific personal brand that will amplify it the right way to get all of those things happening for you. Clarity beats cleverness. It's that simple, right? I gave advice to a guy over in Britain who reached out to me for a one-on-one consultation about his newsletter that he was starting. And I was like, look, there's great wit in here, but you're actually putting way too many jokes in here at the expense of your pretty serious content matter, which was dealing with the rapid decline in the education sector of Britain post-Brexit. And so the next newsletter that he sent out, he had like one piece of wit in there and mostly just an analytical breakdown. And then the next newsletter, he removed the jokes entirely. But the engagement has continued to climb, and so has his subscriber base. And he still reaches out to me every now and again saying, hey, like, thanks for that advice. It was really effective and I'm connecting to the right audience. Because he could have kept doing the jokes in there, but he just would have attracted a different audience that wasn't actually who he wanted to be talking to, which were the people who were problem solvers and not here for a good, fun, hot take and a bit of a laugh. Right? So for him, and for all the clients that I work with, it's been about simplifying your brand so that it can be understood in a sentence or even a word. You know, can you be described in one adjective or verb, a doing word? Is it human? Does it feel human, or is it feature obsessed? And is it really specific? You know, is your goal of your business or your cause that your personal brand is attached to specific? Like mine is, you know, to turn founders into hero brands, right? To turn you into your industry's hero. That's pretty specific and it's pretty human based. You're not going to turn a product into a hero because it's not a person. So yeah, great. And then just some, I guess, warnings, if I can use a negative word after such a, I think, upbeat workshop, presentation. You know, there are some silent killers of good storytelling. One of the best ones is volume equals impact. It's not true necessarily. You can get amazing impressions. I've gotten amazing impressions on posts that performed really well. Makes you feel really good inside. I know for one of my clients, you know, some advice I gave him in a post we put together was their best performing post ever on LinkedIn. But it didn't really amount to much. The exposure is great, but vanity metrics are not everything, right? Don't hide the human, especially on your personal LinkedIn. If you've got a business LinkedIn, you can start to do more brand building there. And then your personal brand, you can start to kind of not completely separate, but start a more healthy relationship between how much your personal brand is boosting your business and how much it's boosting your brand. Because eventually you're going to want to exit that business. And one guy I was talking to at a dinner, he was saying he's trying to exit kind of the Meals on Wheels charity space. He's done a really successful one there in Melbourne. And he goes, but my brand is actually so attached to it that it's been really hard to get work in any other field, you know? So doing that kind of personal brand exit strategy. Content before identity. My version of that is don't shotgun spray your content ideas. Don't kind of write about everything and anything. That looks like a horizontal brand approach, brand building. You're doing a bunch of different things that are not in line with each other. They're standing next to each other and ultimately in different categories. So building your brand identity is vital so that you can kind of be laser focused, so that you can go in and talk about all these different aspects of your life or your professional encounters, but it's on a vertical brand, which is something I didn't talk about because that's in the workshop, but vertical branding is key. And then don't try to sound like everybody else, of course, we've talked about that. And then on an AI note, bad prompts will lead to bad outputs. But that ties back to, do you understand your identity and how you're supposed to build that as a prompt to go into AI if you rely on that more for your content generation? So if you're kind of not happy with the trajectory of your business or your personal brand or something, or you think that it can be better, look at the story and see what is your story doing for you. Because as soon as you have put your story out to market, so to speak, out to the public, the second it touches its first like, the meaning of your story has already started to change because of the way the public interprets it. And thus begins the great ongoing cycle of readjusting your story and personal brand to stay on track. So that the way that you understand yourself is exactly how you've positioned all of them to understand you as well. And that's just ongoing work, unfortunately. You know, but that's why you work with marketers, because they love doing that kind of thing. We're obsessed. So moving on, if today was the theory, then the workshop is the work. I basically primed you brilliantly to kind of step into a 2.5 hour super practical workshop, very activity based, a lot less talking from me, to build that identity before the content. That's really what the outcome of that is. Story structures, live exercises, AI prompting support. And because of the way the workshop is designed, you come out of it with a really thorough, long form AI prompt to start training it on what your brand should be sounding like and fleshing out your distinct founder narrative map. So there's a link there. And then the next slide is just to book a call with me if you're keen for a short 20-minute consult on kind of where you're at and what you should probably be doing for next steps for your brand. So I'll go to that. I'll leave it on here actually for a bit longer and then go to that. That's me. I'm done. Thanks very much for listening to me. And Andrew, I'll throw it to you in the crowd for questions.
Just so you know, I click that QR code and goes to the website class.
Keep scrolling down.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
There you go. Just a tip for the everybody else. So it's about halfway down. Join our exclusive 2.5-hour creative writing workshop. Register my interest. I'd have to do that. Thanks, Angus. Appreciate the nice call out and AI of me at the start. Not AI, but creative work. So we do have time for some questions. We've got a few minutes. And I know from, Angus didn't actually show. Actually, you might want to post up some of your blogs there, mate. Because when I've seen them and seen how much they've sort of lit up on LinkedIn, you can see that just, the 10% more effort of creativity or 20% can really lift sort of standard content to really good. And I know when I've done it before for myself, once I put in the extra effort, you can really see the results. But, to be honest, a lot of the time I just don't get time for that anymore. So if there's questions, you want to just raise your hand. It's a little button. There's a little button down there. This one. There you go. Go, Roz.
I just wanted to reflect on something that Angus talked about in his 4 steps. That, it's interesting when you. I mean, I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn because it's like my network database. There, a lot of my professional contacts are there. But it's funny, you can see 2 types of people that share information on there, and a lot of them are just talking from their own perspective and they recap for themselves, but not really thinking about, how their network would benefit from that. So that was I thought that was a really great insight, Angus, is that's all people do is just regurgitate their own insights for themselves, not for how they could actually keep people more engaged with. I mean, most of us don't care that someone went to a conference and they heard these things, So I just thought that really resonated with me. It was a really valuable point around the offer of the value that you have. There's a thing in leadership when you should be the last person speaking, and you always should be asking yourself, why am I speaking? And it's the same thing. Why am I posting? What's the value there? So thank you for that. It's got me thinking.
My pleasure. Perfect synopsis of that whole point that I was making. Yeah. What else we got?
I love the universal problems reminding me of my pitch framework there. I like that.
Well, and we're in similar fields. It was bound to happen.
But it's slightly different way of doing it. And I think Roz raised a good point, is we all think from our perspective, this is really interesting to me. Everyone else will think this is interesting, but it's not necessarily the case. And it's hard to, you want to promote your offering, but you also want to engage. And it's how much do you do that at, different spaces. It's hard to just give free content away forever. But that's sort of the latest thinking I'm getting from, all the other gurus out there. It's like, give as much value away for free, and then get them into, have your firewalls of like, have to give me an email address further into the process, because people expect a lot more now. So I don't know if anyone else is experiencing that, but that's sort of what I've seen from my network. Any other feedback or comments?
I'll interject very briefly. Whoever's got a question next, please. But on that note of like giving free away, I've been thinking about the way that I talk about like the 4-step framework, and there's actually 3 different theories that are interwoven into all of that as I unpacked. And it's kind of like, well, what's the point of giving you guys the real brainiac stuff behind the operation? And the point is because this only works in the founders that I work with if they understand and completely agree with the process, because it's their brand I'm building, not mine. So when I exit, they need to be able to continue building their brand, because I want them to keep succeeding. So it's if the founder doesn't agree with this philosophy, well, then they're not interested in building a hero brand. So we shouldn't work together. So it's more like I'm showing you what's under the hood so that you totally get, okay, I think this is good or relevant for me, or it's not. Because who wants to waste each other's time? That's why I went into so much depth on that.
And it's also being a teacher, university, but also in the BYOB group. I noticed that I can explain things you know, and from different angles and even many times, but you don't really get it until you do. So in the workshop, you're going to get them to write something or review their content to go, oh, okay, because they understand it, but the application, you tend to fall into habits. It's like I say to my kids when they're doing, say, basketball training, I'm like, don't practice like that if you're not going to play like that, because you fall to the level of practice and discipline, not rise to the occasion often. So can you give us a bit more about what the workshop's going to actually, like, what's the process and so forth?
So we go through it kind of imagining that we're planning our content plan and our creative philosophy, or the way that we express ourselves from scratch. So yeah, we go through, let's look at, for example, 10 pivotal points that led you to your current moment in your career. It's like the first activity we do basically out of the gate. And then we unpack what is the unique way that we actually express ourselves. Can we summarize that into a sentence, and can we shrink that sentence into a word? AKA, I'm a challenger, I would say is my creative philosophy. So my communication style is challenging, without being rude, you know, more provocative, less antagonistic. And then we move through unpacking. We've looked at that framework. Attached to that framework then is actually all the techniques or different ways of doing that 4-step framework, because it's not a one and done. You shouldn't be doing it in that way. You should be having a few different styles of doing the same framework. So now it's learning those ones that are relevant to you. I have a 10 values to write by IP. That's a great question, Serena. We'll answer that after the break, because I don't think we have a date yet. But the 10 values to write by, which we don't unpack all of them, we just do 4 tailored to the audience. Those 4 different styles of overlaying onto that framework to keep that content generation fresh, but also the way that you express yourself, again, across pitches, across newsletters, across presentations, across speaking. That 4-step framework that I went through was from a content perspective, but the more you sit with it and kind of look at how it applies to content, you see how it applies to just the way that you actually plan the design of your personal brand across all avenues, because this is a holistic approach. So then we go through 3 writing long form. When I say long form, no more than like 5 to 10 minutes. Whatever words you get out there is fine. There's no word requirement. Through practicing those different styles and iterating and applying the feedback as we go. And then by the end of it, we then do a little bit of a play of choosing your preferred LLM and inputting it into it with the prompts that we've just built for ourselves through the new brand that we've constructed.
Thank you. Now, the date we didn't actually schedule because we wanted to ask when people wanted to do it next year, because I know some people are going away, some people are not going away. So maybe just a bit of a vote. I kind of was thinking, you know, around the second half of January, you know, maybe the week of the, when you're back, saying yes, Serena, or yes, is that good? Yes.
Yeah, I'll probably come back. I'm leaving tomorrow, but I'll probably come back early to mid-Jan.
Yeah. Thank you. So Angus, when are you back? You're back on the 15th or something?
The 11th of January, I'm back from my honeymoon, everyone.
Yes.
Because I'm getting married in a week. So
Crazy.
I'll come back. I'm happy to do like the 12th of January. Like, we can do it as soon as I'm back.
Yeah, I think we'd schedule it a bit later, probably like 17th, 20th around there. Is that kind of, if people are interested, is that sort of a good time? It's sort of not quite the craziness of, you know, the real year starts sort of in Feb. So that sort of in between the 15th and the 1st of Feb is what I was thinking. So yeah, okay, cool.
Isn't the 17th a Saturday?
Oh, we go. That weekend. Why haven't you commented on the marketing stuff, Diane? I was expecting some gold. I want some.
This was full of gold already. You don't decorate gold with gold.
Diamonds is what you decorate it with, mate. So
right. There you go.
Diane's one of our industry experts in you know, funnels and basically all marketing. So I just wanted your comment on, like, you know, free content versus paid when do you hand over? I know you sent me a message, but you know, for everyone to enjoy.
Sure. Sorry, you want me to say something? Is that okay with Angus? It's his show.
Oh, well, we're in the free flow section of the
Okay,
presentation.
cool. I have been listening. I'm fielding a lot of things today. Look, I love what you've done here, Angus. There's a few gold nuggets that I've taken out of it. That's why I made that comment. I like that when you've got the story right, you can build on that with paid ads. And makes paid ads convert a lot better when you've got the story right and build your brand right around the right story. And I'm saying that from a what I know to be true, not a what I've done perspective, just so we're all clear. This is very much also sort of, I'm here on two counts. One is just seeing like what nuggets I can pick up, but the other one is to learn from you. I don't profess to know everything. I know a reasonable amount about a little tiny bit of stuff, and marketing is such a big world that there's always stuff to learn from everyone you meet in that world. So thanks. And I'm not sure if that quite answers the question, Andy, but
Diane's doing some work with us actually on scorecards and so forth, which we've had a lot of discussions about, where does organic sort of take you and where does paid ads add, and then what's the next steps in the process too, right?
Here's the thing. Good organic will get your articles ready if you've got them, if you've got good, let's call it long tail evergreeny kind of articles on a web page. And I've seen some people recently doing really good posts on LinkedIn that have got like really good thought leadership in them, and they could be, they're not going to expire, they're not going to be relevant in 3 months for the most case, or even 3 years in many cases. So they should be on a blog, not just on a 2 hours to 7 day shelf life platform, right? And so by all means, post them on LinkedIn, always test the response, and then go and get them on a blog page. But off that page, make sure you've got your primary conversion offer on there too, a scorecard or a decent lead magnet or a mini masterclass or whatever. And also, if people are hitting those pages, retarget them. So that's where the ads come in. Retarget them, or even take this story element and put it in YouTube pre-roll ads and design them right so you get maximum traction for minimum spend. But that's a whole other conversation.
That's a whole other webinar coming up to a Bob month near you. All right, so we're out of time. So appreciate the questions, conversation, the comments. Thank you for presenting, Angus, and being so Red Barony. If you know who Red Baron is, you talk about history. So
I've had a friend who keeps calling me, I do know who that is. I've had a friend who keeps calling me the Little Prince, though.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It feels a little infantilizing, but that's okay.
I think it's his accent.
Yeah, classic. But stand out, personal branding, right? Maybe people have cravats or everyone's got their thing, I used to call it. So if you can promote that online, then you can be stand out and remembered. So thanks all for coming. We will see you very soon in the next Bob, whatever that may be, and have a good rest of your night. Thank you.
See everyone.
See everyone.